episode of Made in Europe. This is a monthly show we'll be doing with executives from the EMS industry throughout Europe, and throughout these shows, I will be joined by my co-host and senior partner from Scoop, Marco Annunziata. Marco, thanks for coming back from the beach to be with us here
I'm
today.
still at the beach, as you can see, but you have my full attention. Thanks for having me here, Phil.
That's a pleasure. Our two executives today are Bruno Racault from All Circuits. He's the president and CEO of the company and was actually pivotal in the initial management buyout of the business over a decade ago now, Bruno, some considerable time. And
right, 2009.
Been on quite a journey since then. And we're also joined by Rainer Koppitz. Rainer is the co-founder and CEO of the KATEK group. And the KATEK group have been making waves in the industry over the last couple of years, and particularly making news headlines in the last week or so or month or so with their IPO. So what I wanted to start by doing, and I want to keep this very conversational, so feel free to interrupt at any time, but what I want to start by exploring is the last 12 months and some of the positives that have come out of that period, and where you see yourselves as we go forward. And we've talked separately about this idea of a manufacturing renaissance in Europe, and I want to try and really set the foundation for what the market looks like at the moment. Bruno, perhaps we can start with you. I know last year was hugely challenging, but having read some of your press material, you ended with some very positive news in terms of orders.
2020 has been terrible in the sense that we have lost. We are mostly automotive in our group. Okay, so 75%, and the automotive industry has been touched quite a bit, and we have lost 20-25% of our turnover. So in terms of turnover, the year was not that good, I will say. However, the order intake has been very great. We're seeing really, you call that a renaissance, I will follow you, but we're seeing a lot of appetence for new product, but we're also seeing a trend of bringing back products which are made in China to Europe. So we can discuss those two elements, but there is a reason. There's several reasons behind it. I will say there is one big reason is that the manufacturing process did evolve quite a lot. Our gears are faster and going faster and faster. 10 years ago, a ship shooter was placing 10,000 pieces per hour. Now we're touching the 100,000 pieces. We have all the optical inspection, which were manual 3 years ago. Now we are using 3D automatic optical inspection. So basically, the process itself is asking less and less people. So the labor cost of our product is reducing quite a lot. It's something like less than 5% now for a product which is costing 10 euro. So the advantage that the low cost country, or so-called low cost country, was having by their cheap direct labor is not disappearing, but is less important than it was. And that's an explanation why we're able to come back. We are coming back because we are more and more competitive.
Yeah, and I think when we mix that in with some of the issues around supply chain security and other issues, there are lots of reasons to reconsider Europe. And if Europe is competitive and people can see the value there, it's starting to make sense. What I think is really interesting in the market you're in terms of automotive is you're seeing that reshoring trend, but you're also seeing a trend where I think when some of the car makers are looking at EV in particular, electric vehicles, they're kind of rethinking their supply chain a little bit and looking more directly to EMS companies to get assistance. Is that something you're seeing, Bruno?
Absolutely, yes. So most our, not all, but a lot of new orders are coming from the EV. And you know that in our industry, it's taking 2-3 years between the time we take the order and the time we really start the production. But we are really seeing a trend also to bring all those elements back, will it be in France or Germany, but back to the Eastern Europe. Not only for the supply, the assurance of supply, but also the people are taking into account more and more the influence of the product on the transportation on the planet. So there is this green appetence, which are becoming more and more important on giving us also point. On the last point I want to mention is that the design also is moving. Our designers are taking into account the manufacturability of the product more and more. So they are really making attention on taking care that, or making sure that we'll be able to manufacture in Europe those products. The product which is where you need to make 15 minutes in China or low-cost country, and it's taking only us 1 minute for us, not because we're automatizing the process, but it's also because the process by itself has been reconsidered, the product and the design has been reconsidered and has been made to be manufactured in Europe.
So an element of design for automation or design for a specific supply chain, which I think is hugely valuable.
Absolutely.
Rainer, you started your really exciting journey with the KATEK group a relatively short time ago, and it felt like COVID had the potential to derail that vision, that process, but it didn't. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a bit about that journey through COVID, the acquisitions you made last year, the recent IPO, and where that positions you to play a part in this renaissance.
Yeah, Phil. I mean, the start of last year was very bumpy, honestly speaking, because I would say the very day when it became obvious that also COVID will hit Europe, which was mid of March, when everything exploded. The very day we did the closing with the electronics part of Hoof Group, which was a big outsourcing, and we had big discussions in-house whether this is the right time to sign the contract. But I said, I gave my word to the management, and also, by the way, to the employees. We already had employee meetings, etc. So we decided to sign the contract with no regards that COVID was just to start. And it has been very bumpy, especially like Bruno mentioned, in the part of our group where we are doing automotive, which is something which was last year something like a little bit less than 1/3, but it's 1/3. And we had very high degree short-term work, etc. In order to have some countermeasures against the volume decrease we had from March to April. We had a volume drop of 25%. And then we, very strictly, applied cost discipline and whatever you can do. We had the luck that we also had some, other places in the group where we've seen some kind of very positive special effects due to, healthcare, blood analyzers, respirators, etc. This was very positive, but healthcare was only something like 7% of the business. So it was a positive effect, but it was not compensating what happened in automotive. But then also, like Bruno told, the EV part, in automotive itself developed very positive. I mean, so we are doing those kind of innovative charging solutions directly to Volkswagen and Porsche. And I mean, yes, they haven't sold as many Porsche Taycan, for instance, as they wanted. But I mean, still, it was a I mean, tremendous kind of positive development. So this itself, showed some growth as well. So overall, I mean, it was really, the second quarter was really lousy. But then, all of a sudden, it recovered, and already third quarter was a very good one, and fourth quarter was even better. And I mean, then, we went directly in the situation, which we will be talking about a little bit later, I guess. We then directly came into the situation that, I mean, in all the industries and with almost all the customers we have a totally full order books, like Bruno also said. But I mean, right now, like many in the industry, we are not really in the position to deliver everything the customers want, because all the industries and all the geographies, they, the demand exploded at the same time. And I mean, we all know the problems we are facing right now. So in terms of M&A, which you also mentioned, Phil, we also, in the middle of the crisis, took advantage of the opportunity to take over leases in Leipzig, together with their 100% company, the Telealarm, company being active in the telecare. So that's based on the trend of the aging society. That's a very nice, kind of thing. And I think this was an M&A deal which would not have been possible without the pandemic, honestly speaking, because there was so much pressure on this company. I mean, that we stood ready in order to save the company, and it's a beautiful company. They're also doing something in e-mobility together with a large customer, etc. But it was just that the crisis hit them at a very special moment. So we also took advantage of this, but and then originally, honestly speaking, we planned to do the IPO even in February. So this was the original plan in September. And the reason was that, I mean, we are kind of a family company, I would say, or a major shareholder is Prime Pulse, which is two entrepreneurial families with all their industrial kind of activities. And, we said, if we want to continue this very fast growth, which is built on organic growth as well as a roll-up strategy in this very fragmented market, then we need to get to a broader access to equity than just from this family office, because I mean, this would be a big risk for the family office. Is then we are already the largest company in this group. So we decided to go public. Originally planned to do this in February, but then in November we saw that COVID-19 will cause still some troubles in the market. So it was kind of not really clear what would happen in the capital market. So we said, let's do it in May, which we then finally did. And so now I think we are prepared to continue the growth, but it's not only the M&A part, it's also to, let me say, fuel the growth in those nice, let me say, areas of the group where we see over proportional market growth in the future, and that especially that's healthcare, that's EV, of course, and that's also renewables, specifically in the solar business. There the power electronics as part of it. So this will be the, let me say, growth niches where we further will invest organically, and then we will add some strategical things in the inorganic part.
Yeah, and it's been a fascinating period, and actually watching what you guys have been doing, I found really interesting, because it's fresh eyes looking at an industry that's very traditional, and actually looking at it in a way that can disrupt and kind of change the evolution a bit. Marco, I wanted to bring you in here because you're a writer that writes a lot about technology. You've got a background in economics. You're a European that lives in or lived in Silicon Valley and now lives in Miami. When you look at what's going on with companies like All Circuits and KATEK Group, and you look at what's going in Europe, do you see it as a big opportunity?
I see it as a huge opportunity, Phil. And I actually wanted to highlight a couple of the issues that have come up from both Bruno and Rainer and get their views again on what it will take to really seize this opportunity for the strengthening of manufacturing in Europe. One of the themes that Bruno brought up at the beginning is the fact that with new technologies, manufacturing is becoming less reliant on low-cost production. And that's something we had started to see at General Electric when I was with GE a few years ago. It's definitely becoming stronger and stronger. So low labor costs are becoming less and less important. That's great, except that other countries, including China, understand this. And so they're ramping up their skill, their capabilities. So their competitive ability on that front is also important. And that's where we have to bring in two other considerations that Bruno and Rainer have brought up. One is the sustainability concerns, so the idea of doing things more locally. The other one is building in more resilience, because the pandemic shock is only the latest shock to global supply chains. So there is also the importance of having a supply chain which is less exposed to disruptions to global trade. And then there is the issue of what is the role that is played by institutions, by infrastructure, by government policy in terms of support to industry, targeting support to R&D, but also support to skills and education. So to boil it down to my question for Bruno and Rainer, I would say I definitely see this as a huge opportunity, because the change in technology with the digital industrial revolution combined with these shocks, the latest, the pandemic, is really reshaping the map of global manufacturing. So this here, everybody has an opportunity to jump in and take leadership. But from your perspective, Bruno and Rainer, you are seeing it on the ground. What does Europe need to do besides the effort of companies like yours in order to really seize this opportunity and become again a leading manufacturing player?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Let's boil that down to 2 points. Let's tackle resilience and let's tackle the role of institutions and governments and what Europe needs to do as in terms of governance, but also in terms of investment and what companies need to be thinking about. Bruno, I know the French government have been active. They've been investing in all kinds of different things. Talk to me a little bit about that and what you think is really important for the government to do to actually capitalize on this opportunity, because if they're seeing it as an opportunity to aid the recovery with manufacturing, they need to get involved and help out.
That's a tough question, Phil. Technically speaking, I'm not expecting that the government is interfering in our activity. Okay, we are on our own, and it's very unusual for European guys to have government helping the industrial guy. I have to recognize that very recently, at least in France, they are putting a lot of money to speed up the recovery of France. So we are also getting subsidized to increase the size of the plant. We are getting subsidized to buy new gears and so on. But I think it's not really the main part I'm expecting for the government. If you are back to the low-cost element, if you are looking at our at the number of people we have in the plant, okay, we are used to have 80% of I will say blue collar and 20% of white collar. This is moving rapidly, and today we are 50-50. So we have a need of less blue collar, and we have a huge need of engineer. And where need some help from the government is to really provide us engineer with the right level and the right number and so on. So this is very important point. Okay, and the second important point for us is the infrastructure. And you mentioned it. The electricity is key for us. And not only the electricity, the price, but also the stability of the electricity. If I compare the electricity in France compared to the Mexico, for example, that I know well, the line is going down in Mexico every 2 hours. When in so the result is that you need to put to the dustbin all your production or half an hour production. In France, and I don't know if it is the same in Germany, but I guess it's the same, it's very stable, so we are never stopped by the electricity. So it looks idiot, but this infrastructure in terms of electricity, but you can also speak about roads and so on and so on, is very important for us because things are moving faster and faster. On one very important point for us is that we need to deliver. We need to commit and we need to make our commitment. And if we don't have the right infrastructure, if we don't have the right supply chain, we are dead. Now, what's missing us now, and you mentioned it also, Marco, it's really the supply chain. All the components are made now in China or in Far East, and we are suffering of that. The recent element is demonstrating it. So we need also to ask the government to bring or to facilitate the move to bring back some of this component production in Europe, if we could.
Yeah, and I think that's a really curious challenge. I was on a show recently talking with component manufacturers and with the IPC, and the US government had announced a few billion, maybe 5 or 6 billion for investment in semiconductor. 2 days later, I'd read a piece from Korea. South Korea are investing 70 billion over the next 9 years in semiconductor. And they're already one of the largest semiconductor regions in the world. So I don't see that shift happening quickly. And, you know, semiconductor isn't stood up particularly quickly. But I think you make a couple of interesting points there. And I wanted to go to Rainer and ask, firstly, do you agree that it's really down to you and government can just maybe support in terms of infrastructure and making sure that the playing field is there for you, but they're not actually going to do that much for manufacturing?
I do fully agree with all Bruno said, especially also the shift from I mean the blue collar to more, you know, the white collar, the engineer part. And I mean the reason behind is, of course, first that I mean we have all this you know, high degree or higher and higher degree of automation, so you need less blue collar workers. But on the other side also, what our European customers are expecting from us is not only to be, you know, kind of brilliant production companies, but I mean, one of the differentiators which we have is the close cooperation with our customers. I mean, also in the field of engineering, what we call co-development. So we have many customers, you know, which in the past, they were just saying, I mean, you are the manufacturer. I mean, here is the bill of material, here is thing, give me the best price, go for it. I mean, nowadays, and also in the automotive part, I don't know whether you see the same, Bruno, you know, they are asking us to go into joint projects. I mean, I was visiting one of our big customers, you know, the week before last week. And I mean, their main ask was, I mean, in former times, it was always, I mean, price. And now the first ask was they want to have something like, how did they call it? An engineer, residential engineer. So an engineer from our side, you know, coordinating all the joint engineer approaches, which is sitting in their house even, which then can, you know, steer a team that we can do together exactly what Bruno said, that we can do together design to manufacture, design to cost, etc. And I mean, that's a huge opportunity for Bruno and myself, because I mean, that's a degree of partnership, of cooperation, which you normally can't do with those companies in the Far East or in China. That's very difficult to have this proximity, this level of close cooperation. And then also what we see very often is that then the engineers, they go to one of our prototyping centers and they want to see the prototypes coming out, discussing with our project leaders and the engineers, how can we further improve this? I mean, that's exactly the chance that we have. And I agree with what you said. That's something which we need to do. What we need, in return, from the government as support is more that, let me say, we have a kind of that we have the right infrastructure. And I mean, one of the most important things is that we have access to the right level of skills. I mean, we have this duale Ausbildung, apprenticeships, etc., which we are doing a lot in Germany, also in our company. But that's not all. We need also this high-level engineers from the universities, and we need it in a way that they don't just go to a university here and then they go to the US or they go to wherever. We need them in our companies, and all the let me say the ecosystem in order to make this happen. That's very clearly something where we need the help from the government. I mean, that will be decisive in the war for talents what we have here. It's not all about blue collar workers.
Yeah, I think the talent question is huge, and I know Bruno probably wants to chime in on that. Go ahead, Bruno. Marco.
No, I just wanted to jump on two issues. The first one is indeed the talent, which, as you know, I've been very focused on. And Rainer was underlining it very, very well. I think what's interesting is in the discussion on jobs, we get too concerned about technology wiping out jobs. And there is some of it, the increase of automation is playing a role, but we are missing the fact that there is gigantic scope for more specialized and highly trained labor, which is not necessarily university level. So we need more engineers, but we also need more specialized labor, which is very rewarding kind of job. And that's where I would be interested in hearing some thoughts from both Bruno and Rainer on what can be done by both private companies and the education system, possibly government, to push this, because I feel it's something where everybody is failing, not just in Europe, but in the US as well. The second point I wanted to stress is Rainer talked about the ecosystem. I think this is hugely important. You mentioned my experience in Silicon Valley, Phil, and what makes Silicon Valley strong is exactly the fact that you have a concentration of talent and you have a diffusion of information. Now, what Rainer was describing is something very similar, where companies discuss projects together. The engineers from their customers and the suppliers who work together, ideas are exchanged, new ideas come up, better ways of doing things come up. And in an era of technological change, this is hugely productive. So for me, this could actually be the secret weapon that boosts manufacturing.
Yeah, and I think, Bruno, if you can tackle that in two questions. One is, are you seeing that incredibly close collaboration with your customers where they've got engineers in residence, you're working closely with engineers? I know you work with your customers on the design of product. And then secondly, how are we going to tackle that challenge in terms of skills and talent and make sure that we do have the available talent? Rainer talks about apprenticeships and engineers in Germany. They have a reputation worldwide, and that's why they're in demand in Silicon Valley. But it's important that we keep enough talent in Europe. So let's start with specifically the collaboration with customers.
Okay, let's take an example. We have today new technology coming in, I mean, in the EV, which is the use of the component in carbure de silicium. I don't know how you say that in English, on the one with the nitrure of gallium. Those components, they are absolutely needed for the next EV. The component does exist, but we don't know really how to process them. When I say that, we don't know how to attach them to a solid part on that we can refresh as we want. Okay, and the challenge is, do we need to use water to refresh the engine or not? And of course, if we don't use the water, it's gonna to save a lot of weight. Weight is important in the automotive, and a lot of cost. So there is a big challenge that we need to discuss with our customer, and which is really part of our process of our intelligence. And this is new for us because we are really now having not only the challenge to make it quick and faster, but to be smart enough to find new process to create the new EV. And the EV is giving us a lot of challenge like that we need to discuss with our customer. And this is for the automotive, but we have also the same challenge for the green electricity, for all the automated way to transport the electricity or to store the electricity. Okay, so yeah. I'm absolutely in sync with Rainer. The fact that we are closer to our customer is really a key element for us, key element for the creation or the design, but also key element to be able to change a component by another component in a very quick manner. Because when you have your production, which is a 6,000 kilometer away, it's very difficult to handle the supply chain, to make quick investment. On now the price is in the component, not in the labor. So it's really key that we are using the right component at the right place as soon as possible. Okay, so yes, definitely we have an advantage here.
And I think
our customer cannot afford to have production 6,000 kilometers away.
And in a different time zone with all those communication challenges. And I think what I find really fascinating is that level of collaboration goes way beyond design for manufacture. What you're talking about there with and silicon carbide is the term you were looking for in English. What you're talking about with those kind of challenges is the actual ideation and the actual innovation of the product. So for you to be involved at that stage and then be able to take it all the way through to production really designs you into the product as a very, very strategic partner. And I think that's a really exciting development as we look at an EMS industry or a manufacturing industry that is fit for this renaissance that we're talking about.
But at the same time, it's a challenge for us to go to your next question, because it's now 40 years that we are not doing electronics in Europe, okay, or maybe exaggerating a little bit, but not that much. Okay, so now we have to reappropriate ourselves the production of electronic, and we have to retrain, rethink, and acclimate not only the engineer I was talking about, but Marco is totally right. We need also more specialized labor. Okay, and so it's a problem for us. It's also an advantage because that means that people which are taking vacation away in China on 20% not coming back is a real problem now, because you need to have trained people which are coming on time, because the cost is in the equipment, not in the people. But if the people is not here to run the equipment, you are losing a lot. So you need to have specialized people coming every day on time. On this is also a challenge, but I think it's a challenge where we have an advantage in Europe, because I consider the people we can, in our company, I mean the Agile line, we can train, form, incentive people which are doing a good job.
Yeah, and you're not going to have that same staff attrition that is very much the norm in Asia. And you mentioned, people going on vacation. I think the numbers are in double figures in terms of percentage every Chinese New Year of people that go back to their homes and decide this is actually the place I want to be, and don't return. So that's a really interesting challenge. What I wanted to do now is kind of just, if you like, visualize what a manufacturing industry fit for this renaissance might look like, and how your businesses are developing to enable you to do that. Marco, perhaps I can bring you in here first. When you look at kind of almost redesigning an industry, and I do think the EMS industry is fit for redesign. I think disruption is appropriate at the moment. But when you see that process, how do you go about that? What do you see as perhaps the key talents and features and attributes the big players in the industry are going to need to have to capitalize on this opportunity?
Very, very hard question, Phil. And I think
that's why I gave it to you, Marco.
Let me strongly agree with the premise, which is we are in a phase of disruption which will completely change the face of manufacturing, including, I think, the way we tend to think of manufacturing. Because thinking with my economist hat, people tend to talk about manufacturing on one side and services on the other. And people talk about how all societies, the US and to some extent Europe, are becoming more and more service-oriented. But I think that this technological disruption we're seeing now is actually blurring the line between manufacturing and services. Think of what Rainer earlier. Part of what they produce is also a service to their customers. It's the training, it's the creation, projection, and programming and project building service. So we need to think about it completely differently. I think what is needed, first of all, from manufacturing companies in Europe is to think in a more open-minded way, to think about what kind of problems am I trying to solve for my customers? What do they need to do? And how can we get there together by using new technologies? I think it's very important also when you think of the digital industrial disruption to technologies, to think in a completely different way. This is where people like Bruno and Rainer can take a step back and say, okay, I've been doing things a certain way until now, but with new technologies and new objectives, I could perhaps completely restructure the way I am doing things, both within my manufacturing plants, but also on how I apportion and distribute both the development and the production between myself, my own suppliers, and my customers. So I think there is a need to be a lot more flexible in how you reorganize these things. Realize that the power of digital technologies, both on the manufacturing itself, with things like 3D printing, but even more so on the power of leveraging data to approach new ways of manufacturing, to develop new materials, to use new materials, are opening up entirely new possibilities. So I would say the number one priority is to be more open-minded about how we are doing things. The number two priority is talent, and we've heard it before. This is going to be absolutely crucial. And the number three priority is the creation of the ecosystem. So deciding how do you find the right partners. They could even be some of your competitors to some extent. They will definitely include your suppliers and your distributors and your customers. But how do you build around you an ecosystem that allows you to be more and more competitive? Realizing, I thought I'll conclude here in just a minute, Phil, but I thought I wanted to go back to something that Bruno highlighted earlier on the question of the role of government. And clearly the point was the role of government has to be supportive in the background, creating the right condition rather than giving direct help. I completely agree. We also have to realize that in the global competition, there are countries like China which take a much more centralized approach to this. And therefore, I think that is the wrong approach, but it can be a powerful approach in the short term. So our ability in Europe to counter that with what we were saying earlier, the creation of a private sector ecosystem, I think would be crucial.
Yeah. So I'm going to tackle the question of disruption first, and I'm going to go to the person that looks the most disruptive, the guy who's got the glasses to match his shirt. You were nodding your head frantically when Marco was talking about blurring the lines between service, manufacturing, product. That's something that I know you're really thoughtful about.
Yeah. And honestly, I think the renaissance of manufacturing industry in Europe starts with that we don't see ourselves as manufacturing industry. I mean, that's the starting point. I don't see ourselves as manufacturing industry. And as many of my colleagues know, I even hate the term EMS because I think it's not, it's by far not describing what we are doing. It's kind of underselling what we are doing. So what the European industry is looking for is for partners, for the entire electronics part. They are not looking for just something like doing PCBA. So that's not what they are looking for. They are more and more looking for partners in electronics, which is more a comprehensive end-to-end view. That doesn't mean that all of your customers want you to do everything in the electronics value chain. So from engineering or core engineering, prototyping, material handling, PCBA, maybe final assembly, testing, logistics, but more and more want more and more pieces of this value chain from you. And if I look into our sales pipeline right now, we are looking salesforce.com, and from each and every project you can exactly see what parts of the value chain are demanded. Then the top 20 project, there's not one project which is only PCBA. There are always some other interesting elements included, and almost 1/3 of this is covering the entire value chain. So entire kind of electronics, because we should position ourselves as the electronics trusted partners for the industry, with no regards whether it's automotive or whether it's healthcare or renewables or whatever. And then of course, if you have a customer which wants to start the relationship with, simple PCBA manufacturing, that's great. But in our eyes, and that's our perspective, that's just the start of a partnership. Yeah. So then with cross and upselling, we will take the partnership to the next and the level and the next and the over next level, yeah, in order to convince him to also do the prototyping in our prototyping center, to do some co-development, maybe think about whether we also can do the final assembly, maybe some parts of the logistics. So you can take it from there, and the more comprehensive you are becoming, the more you move up from a pure manufacturing supplier to a partner, and also the margins are going up at the same moment. Yeah. Because you are responsible for much more than just the PCBA manufacturing. That's our deep belief in the company and the entire philosophy and how we position ourselves towards the customer. So we are not, let me say, arrogant and saying, we want to do it all. We don't want to do PCBA manufacturing. That's of course not the case. With 650 customers, we are only doing PCB manufacturing. But what we are seeing is, with the right discussions and approaches, we can move them to much more parts of the value chain, and that's working out. And what I'm seeing is that there's a strong demand. And what Bruno said before, that especially EV in the automotive is kind of a revolution, also in terms of how the OEMs are thinking about with whom they are working and what they are doing there. We are just now in contact with one of the very large German OEMs. And in former times, they asked their automotive supplier, the tier ones, to develop something electronically and then asking someone to manufacture it. Nowadays, because EV is so important, they start to develop, with their own engineers, some nice, ideas and some nice modules, and they are directly looking for an electronics partner, and they are not even asking in this very huge project the traditional tier ones, but they are directly going to those former EMS companies, which position themselves in order to do much more than just PCBA, in order to work together with them. And that's something. Yeah. So the EV revolution is also a huge opportunity for our companies like Bruno's and my company, in order to position ourselves completely different now in the automotive ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think it's a catalyst for change, Rainer. When I look at what's going on in EV, the car manufacturers have gone from a position where maybe electronics was a single-digit percentage of the vehicle, And it made sense to outsource that through their traditional channels, maybe through the companies that they were buying tires from and braking systems from and all kinds of other stuff. What they've done, and I think it's very intelligent on their part, is taken a blank canvas. They've taken a blank canvas to design a supply chain for EV, and they're creating something that's much leaner and is going to work better for them. Bruno, when you look at that, not just in the EV market, it's different for every company, isn't it? I know you have companies that are like small French innovators that are selling direct to consumers, different supply chain design there, but fierce collaboration between you and that brand or OEM to literally be their electronics partner, so work with them on the design all the way through to how that product is packaged and delivered to their customer.
Yeah, and there's a point that we didn't mention, which is also Marco mentioned it a little bit. This is bringing a need of transparency to everyone. And by transparency, I mean, you know, with Industry 4.0, we're talking about communication system and so on. But transparency, that means that you explain what you are going to do on to let the customer see what we are doing. Okay, but yeah. We talk also plant with a glass of wall.
Yeah, I remember when we first met, Bruno, you talked to me about the glass factory, and I love the term.
It looks idiot. Yeah, it looks idiot, but behind that, that means that with now the new means of communication, you let enter the customer, technically speaking, in your plant. And Rainer will understand what I mean. When you let the customer seeing what you are doing, you have a big problem because you cannot hide anything. Okay, you cannot hide that. Well, another customer asks you to place his order first because he asks you to do so and so on. So you need to be perfect in execution. Yeah. And this is a trend which is going to, I guess, increase more and more. Okay, so you will not only need to be a good manufacturer, but you will need to be an intelligent manufacturer. That means you need to plan, you need to do what you are doing, you need to have the right quality, because if you are transparent, the customer will see that you are having a bad yield, and so on and so on. So the fact that you need to be transparent, and this need of transparent is bringing other concepts that will certainly change the world of the AMS.
Yeah,
and we have to be ready on that. We are not ready yet, okay, but we have to prepare that. And in the same time, there is people or jobs which are going to disappear. For example, the people which are in charge of the customer to communicate how much part and when you will get those parts are going to disappear, because you will let the customer enter in your system to see when you will get the part, on how and when. And so you have a transition in our business that we are not all seeing that, but which will be very, very important in the future for us.
You need to be the kind of manufacturer that not just welcomes engineers to come in and collaborate with you, but actually welcomes your customer right into your MES system, into your ERP system. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, on that's the challenge, because when you are letting the customer see everything what you are doing, wow, there's a lot of right, exactly, okay, and there's a lot of challenge behind it, and that's, I mean, the system are ready. It's more the mentality and the way how we operate, we are not totally ready yet.
Yeah. Rainer, when you look at that, I mean, I love the idea that the future of European manufacturing includes this concept of the glass factory, and I've always really liked Bruno's vision here, that the customer can see exactly what's going on. That's part of that fierce collaboration, isn't it? That's part of being designed in as the electronics partner to a brand. Is that something you feel safe doing? Is that something you feel you're driving your business towards being happy to expose?
With some customers and in some industries, I mean, I think we are already very close to this. Also because in some industries you have very strong legal requirements, like in healthcare, for instance. So this is traditionally much more, let me say, transparent to the customer and other authorities. I mean, every process step and every number and traceability, etc., than in other industries. But I mean, I agree that, I mean, this is one step of one important step of this closer and closer cooperation with the customer. And it's for me, it's also the other way around. That, I mean, you also as an electronics partner have much deeper insights into what happens with your customer in terms of what their customers are creating in demand, which goes into their systems, so that you then can react. And I mean, especially we have some customers where I mean, directly can see also the demand which is coming from their customers, so that we at a very early point can react. And we are seeing this, for instance, in let me say, in customer relationships where we both serve. Let me take automotive again, where we both serve a tier 1, which is then serving the OEM, and then on the other side we are serving the OEM. And direct with some other projects. I mean, what we see is, I mean, if we are serving the tier 1, we have a delay of information of which regards to the demand, which is something, I mean, several weeks compared to we are directly working with the OEM. And I mean, no wonder. And guess what happens now in the crisis with all the material? I mean, with those where you have the visibility for much longer period of time, you can react much better, and you can also discuss with your suppliers. So no banks are standing still with the delay and the lack of transparency where you have the tier 1 in between. It's going to be extremely difficult. So the transparency, I mean, has two sides. The one is the into your factory and what you are doing in process, but on the other hand side, I mean, especially in those times of material crisis, you also need to have much better visibility of what happens on the customer side. I mean, for us, for instance, right now, I don't know whether it's in France the same, Bruno. I mean, for us, it's a catastrophe that, I mean, from one day of the other, we are getting the knowledge that one of our big OEMs in the automotive industry, I mean, decided to close the major factory for 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, we got this information last Wednesday, and they closed on Monday. And for us, I mean, to react everything and to let me say reshuffle everything in the production, etc. I mean, that's a catastrophe, and that's exactly that's also something which need to be changed in terms of transparency and close exchange of information.
Yeah, and I think that transparency is digital, and I think, Bruno, it goes both ways, doesn't it? It absolutely you have to have, you talk about your customers seeing into your business. You have to be able to see into their business to be able to predict demand, and that requires a lot of trust.
Right, but I just want, I don't know if our discussion leads on, I don't want to let people thinking that we're interested only in the car manufacturer. Okay. Yeah. We cannot serve only the car manufacturer. We need also to serve the tier 1. Okay. And why I'm saying that is that we need to be, your point of transparency, you are expecting it for the car manufacturer. Okay, but you need to find a way also to communicate with all the other guys from the supply chain or the other your other customer. Okay, so it's really a total system that we need to put in place. What I was meaning by transparency is that you need to be able to, and that's one of the difficulty, to talk with the car manufacturer, with the tier 1, with the tier 2, and so on on the same manner. You need to be honest with all of them. Of course, by doing that, you are showing also the defect of one car manufacturer or one tier one compared to the other, because they see everything. Okay, so this point of transparency is touching also the fact that you are kind of communicating of the bad behavior of the others. This is new. Okay, you are not hiding anything. You see what I mean? So it's also a tendency, a trend that we need to cope, and that may be one of explanation why we are not that much advanced compared to the technical capability you have. Let's take an example. Now they are asking you to record part by part the oven temperature curve, the optical inspection result, the test result, part by part. So you have a huge amount of information that you are recording part by part. I agree with Rainer. The first one to ask that was the medical industry. Okay, but now the automotive industry is asking us more and more, and the others are following. So the need of information that they are requesting is important. The need of information we need from them is also important, but also, okay, that means that we will be communicating between the competitors, okay, and they will see each other what will be the impact on our plant of the other customers that we have. You see what I mean? And this is tricky.
Yeah, we have some challenges there to work out. And it's really interesting. You talk about the importance of the data, and that brings us on to maybe Marco's other point about what's really important in the future of this manufacturing in Europe, and that's the ecosystem and how that ecosystem works. Bruno, you talked about an ecosystem that, for example, in the automotive has to include the car manufacturer, you guys, but also the tier one suppliers in the middle, and those relationships have to be good and they have to be connected elsewhere. And then the way they interact elsewhere as well. But I think there's also an ecosystem question in the way how you guys work together, how you work with some of these manufacturing as a service platforms, and how that whole ecosystem can be leveraged to benefit everybody, particularly the consumer, can have the best possible impact on the planet in terms of sustainability, and can allow everybody to win enough to make it a valuable business to be in. Rainer, do you think there's that level of cooperation? It always felt in the past, and I think you're right, the term EMS positions you badly, but it always felt in the past the OEM's job was to get as much of the EMS company's margin into their margin as possible. That relationship needs to change.
Definitely, it needs to change. But I mean, as I said at the very beginning, when I was talking about my glasses, I mean, we are not in a really margin-rich business. I mean, that's a matter of fact. I mean, but when I look into, I mean, the typical margin profiles, and I'm talking here about EBITDA margins here. I mean, then you are seeing that, I mean, typical just PCBA manufacturers in the mass market, so like consumers, computers, etc. I mean, they are doing in the lowest digit area percentage points of EBITDA. If you look into what we call high value electronics, so you are doing electronics manufacturing, maybe with a little bit of final assembly, a little bit of prototyping, a little bit of co-development, maybe in healthcare, maybe in machinery, whatever. I mean, you have a good chance to go to the, let me say, higher single digits. And, you know, some, if you are in a niche, you are even going to something like 9–10%, but I mean, those are exceptions. But then, I mean, if you further move up and you know, are really the electronics partner for some kind of meaningful things like charging or other kind of things, you are even able to go to the double digit area, because I mean you are you can do EBITDA margin, you can do something like 12%, something like 13%. I mean that's doable as we see. So those are the three, and of course I'm simplifying here a lot, but I mean those are the three major, let me say, profit zones we have in the industry. And one of the reasons why we think that not only we, but the entire traditional EMS industries should have the ambition, not for all of their business, but for parts of their business, to have then, you know, a nicer margin kind of split and mix, you know, go into those areas as well, in selected areas, of course, not boil the ocean doing everything. So so that's the first part. The second part is what we also, I think, what we also can improve in our industry, I think, is the cooperation between the electronics companies, the EMS companies. If I look into other industries, the degree and the level of cooperation between, let me say, the market participants is much deeper and much higher than, you know, I'm seeing it in our industry today. I mean, of course, I have contact, at least in Germany, to most of the managers and the CEOs of the most important companies, of course, but that's more, let me say, kind of a loose exchange of minds, and I'm looking for a head of sales. Do you have an idea? And I mean, that's more something. It's very loose, but it's not like that we as an industry, you know, have a joint vision, joint wish list, which we also address to the government, etc. That we think about solutions where we can join forces now during the material crisis. I mean, at least in Germany, I'm not really seeing this right now, but I'm seeing this in other industries. And I think that's something which also, not only in Germany, but on a European level, should also happen in future. And don't take me wrong, I'm not a big supporter of all those kind of that, I mean, smaller EMS companies are, you know, building something like joint purchasing initiatives. All of this have been failing in the past. I don't believe in this, but I think there are topics, there are areas where the European industry here in our industry can work much closer together in the future, and I'm not seeing this right now.
Yeah, I think that collaboration is huge, Bruno, and I'm sure you agree with that it happens in every part. It's difficult to collaborate with people that were traditionally seen as competition, but you know, I guess in France that some of your competitors, in inverted commas, work with the same OEMs that you do, and if there's better communications there, you'll both serve the OEM better.
I mean, you're right, but I have to admit that Rainer is right. There is not that much of communication between us and user in France. On that, I'm just thinking here, and actually there is absolutely none between at the European level. Yeah, which is strange. Huh? If we take a little bit of thinking, we should be able to communicate, to work together at least a little bit. And I have no example, at least in the people I know, of collaboration between European guys. Yeah. So that's maybe something we should discuss together. But
yeah, no, I was thinking there's a couple of actions for me and Marco. One is to look at that process and how we, you know, maybe get CEOs together so we are talking better. The second one that Marco and I are going to go and think about is what we rename this industry. And I think it's, you know, it needs to have partner in the term. You need to be seen as partners to the OEMs and brands, and you need to be able to provide pretty much everything they need to be between them and the consumer. And some of that is logistics. Some of it's even, you know, we're in the new direct-to-consumer market. It's doing the whole process of predicting volumes and making sure production's in place to do that. I think wrapping up, I think transparency is absolutely huge. And I think as we move to that glass factory, but that whole glass ecosystem, we'll put ourselves in a wonderful position to actually be able to capitalize on this huge opportunity that exists here in Europe. So I had a fabulous time talking to you guys. I'm conscious that we could talk for another 2 hours if we had the time. We'll wrap it up there, and we'll get back together soon and talk about some of these other issues. But in the meantime, Bruno, Rainer, Marco lost his internet connection, which is another thing the government needs to fix.
The US government in this case.
Yeah, well, I think in his case, he's in Italy at the moment with family. So but it's everywhere you need a good connection, particularly for all that data to flow. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being so open and collaborative on this conversation. And I look forward to talking again next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.